Hello and welcome to today's training video where I'm going to share how the solver approaches dealing with a 33% donk bet from the big blind against the middle position in a single raise pot 100 big blinds deep. And I'll be showing how this responds in a very wide range of text board textures actually. In fact, I picked out 24 different possible flops with a mix of flops from ace high boards to high card boards to paired boards and then also monotone boards and low card boards. So you're going to be able to see how to respond to this 33% donk from a very wide range of boards in that sense. So really looking forward to this one because admittedly I haven't really ever looked in with the solver of how I meant to deal with donks just because it's not something you're not really supposed to do in the vast majority of situations in the big blind, like most time you're just meant to check range as such. But it's definitely an interesting sort of thought experiment and it does have some practical value because both in live and online you will face some soft opponents who will be donking on the flop at different moments, and it's kind of good to know how you're actually supposed to deal with it. Obviously, there are some limitations to the coverage that we have here that, for example, we're only looking at it with 100 big blind stack and not say with 60 or 40 or 20 or so forth. And also it's true only looking at it from middle position versus big blind and not some other positions, like say versus a small blind or say if you're in early position or if you're in button or cutoff. But the idea is just to kind of keep these consistent so we can develop some heuristics based on the board texture. And, if after this training you're sort of interested to explore further, you can then sort of see how those heuristics hold up or how they vary, with different positions or on, different stack sizes. So you can kind of like, pivot based on that. But it's just to kind of give a little bit of a foundation to work with at least. So at this, what you'll see here is that, well, rather than just checking range as opposed to in this hypothetical on the ace, king, queen, two-tone flop, single raise pot 100 big blinds with the low jack versus the big blind heads up. And then in this case, saying, well, what happens if we bet 2%? And it's a question you can also ponder for yourself, like before going deeper into it, to ask, okay, like what would my strategy be? It's a low jack facing a 33% donk. Also, one other limitation as well as is true to in live poker especially, but also on some soft online networks, and you might also face donks of varying sizes. So, obviously the way you would respond to a pot size donk or a half pot size donk or a 75% pot size donk. Obviously, your response is going to be a little bit different compared to a 33% donk. So again, it's something, if you have the node locking tool in GTO Wizard, you can play around with that and kind of see what the differences are. But the right way is kind of keeping it just all very consistent and just observing what the differences are, like primarily based on the type of flop that we have. Because I feel like that's just going to keep things as simple as possible and avoid things getting too confusing if we're like using a lot of different, you know, positions or bet sizes or so forth or stack sizes. But anyway, in any case, let's look at what the answer would be if they do bet two. And yeah, you'll sort of see it's a little bit of a disclaimer in the software where it says that, it's a rare line, of course, by the big line, so that the answer may not be completely accurate. But yeah, it's sort of the facts that we're just raising like nearly all of our entire range here. I mean, you could probably just raise like pure raise your entire range and not be sort of losing too much EV. Perhaps mixing in, yeah, some false hands that play really badly, like the deuces to the sixes and even potentially the sevens. That is, really bad on this kind of flop. But yeah, the reason for this is basically coming down to the equity, because if you think about it, the board just sort of crushes our range. We're just going to have so many, pairs or two pairs, and obviously, Jack 10 is a straight here. We'll like have a very clear both equity advantage and nut advantage. And actually, because they can't have like aces, kings, queens, ace, king, this sort of thing. Um, and yeah, if you look at the equity, like the middle position equity is basically 68% to the big blind's 32%. So when you do have a big equity advantage like this, you will see that there will be a lot of raising happening. And you can also kind of think about, well, okay, what would be the correct size to sort of raise, and you can't see the solver is going for a very mixed strategy here, but with maybe a slight preference towards the raise size it's like a little bit lower than pot. So whether that's, 5.35 like a 33% raise or 7.55 for a 55% raise. But you can sort of see it's general heuristic that yeah, we're basically folding the absolute bottom of the range some of the time. Like the 9-8, 10-8, Jack 8, Jack 9, 10-9 are folding some of the time, but pretty much all of the other hands, yeah, are just really going for it at this point. That if you have like basically a card like higher than a jack in your hand, then yeah, or like jack 10, of course, then yeah, you're basically just raising here and you're going for a small to mid size. So that was probably one of the more easy examples, but still, yeah, it kind of gives a line that sort of the higher our sort of equity is, and the more we can kind of, in a sense, like get out of line and just raise against the donk, and it just yeah puts them in a really tough spot. If we kind of play out say a 7.55 raise, then yeah, it's well, I mean the big blind, yeah, it's not even showing it because it's so far off the G territory, but we can at least see how we're meant to respond to it in general. Now I did save a whole lot of these spots, so I'm just going to click and yeah, just find the next spot for the ace high as an example. I think that breaking it down into theme is also really nice like this, where again you can sort of see that if it come when it comes down to the five different types of flops, if we sort of compare the equity of middle position and big blind, we can kind of see that, and it's sort of a bit common sense, but like the ace high flops are basically the best kind of flops for us in a way, because yeah, we have a lot of ace X in our raising range, and if you look at the big blinds calling range, obviously yeah, they're calling some A hands at their percentage of ace-X that they have is just going to be considerably smaller than the percentage of ace-X that we have. And also you can see like they're raising like a tiny bit of their suited aces and like ace king off and this sort of thing. So that sort of explains a little bit, yeah, why in this spot when if they do donk like 33% pot, again, we're just getting really out of line that we're not even having like all that much of a calling range. Like if you look at this, aren't even really any hands here that are basically calling more often than like say the other actions where there's a hand where let's say like calling more often than you're going for the various raise sizes. So it means that it's a spot where yeah, you can just basically rise a pretty large percentage of the time. Again, the principle being that okay, in this case there isn't a immediate straight draw that's completed, being that yeah, aces are basically the nuts on this in this spot. And of course again we have like a lot more nuts to go with our equity advantage of like 68% here. But yeah, in this case, we can, yeah, just basically raise quite right. It's a very similar principle, like just raising, any kind of like half decent sort of hand. And yeah, like even some of the, yeah, hands like say 8-7 suited, 9-7 suited, King 7 suited, your hands like King Jack, King 10 with gut shot. Like if you sort of have like any kind of equity whatsoever, you basically can just kind of raise here and again go either, 5.35 big blinds and a 8 big blind pot, or 7.5 big blinds, and yeah, but again, like going close to the size of the pot, like around that range, it just yeah makes it really hard for them to kind of respond in a way because we just have like nearly all the nuts. So, and you can sort of see like by looking at these sort of heuristics, yeah, it just gives us some good outlines in general for flop play, that even though it's a very specific situation, yeah, you can kind of see principles that can obviously come up in, in non-docking situations as well, or, say if they float the turn or the river, you could also, or if they like bet the out on the turn or the river. Again, like you can sort of look up those spots and kind of see the similarities or differences compared to the flop, but just focusing on the flop for this particular training, just so you kind of see what the sort of heuristics are, like how what's, going to be the situation where we can just raise a very wide percentage of our range, are the spots where we can kind of just sort of call, we'll be mostly calling as such. But again, you're going to notice like how little we basically fold to a donk. Actually, I kind of clicked the wrong one here. I kind of jumped into the high card boards, but let's continue with the ace size first. Again, like on the ace high boards, like ace jack free rainbow here. Again, you can kind of see that we're not really folding that much. Only 20% of hands, so just like the obvious kind of junk, like the hands with yeah the queen nine suited, king seven suited, king eight suited. Like basically king nine suit's kind of the strongest hand that we're folding because any better hand is going to have at least a gut shot in this spot. Um, so yeah, that kind of makes sense in that respect that we continue with all the broadways. I suppose one difference we do see is that when there is like an actual low card, like a free as such, that does mean that we are going to be calling a little bit more often in comparison. Like the margin is a little bit closer than between call and raise. And if we kind of look at what are sort of hands that are going to be calling, then it's going to be these sort of hands that are kind of, let's say, marginal mate hands. Like they're probably good, but if the pot gets very big, they could get a bit dicey. So a lot of these ace X hands, like ace nine, soon less like these hands going to mix in some calling, and it kind of makes sense that the lower the kind of the ace, the more you're going to be kind of just calling it down, in case you're running into a better ace X from the donk, as it were. Um, and yeah, also you can kind of see like some of these hands, like these sort of gut shots, and even kings and queens. They're hands where when you call, like you've still got some equity, and or even in the case of kings and queens, quite decent equity. But at the same time, yeah, you don't sort of want the pot to get too bloated because let's say if you raise with like the king queen and then you get free bet, then yeah, you can kind of just fold very comfortably in a sense, which is all the reason why you're kind of seeing it raise some portion of time. These like king queen suited or type of hands, as it were. I guess yeah, queen ten also a gut shot that yeah again is you're kind of happy to fold if it gets free bet. You're not too concerned about it because you already had a gut shot to begin with. But yeah, basically that's kind of how this sort of works, and you kind of see how the hands that do have like a free in them or a jack in them are going to be doing some chunk of racing, but also, in a case like King Jack and Queen Jack, a lot of flatting as well, where you sort of, yeah, don't want to make the pot like too big in a certain sense. Because round, does have a decent chance to be the best against the donk. But yeah, kind of an interesting one where, yeah, you're going to be raising slightly more, but if you sort of, let's say, called half the time and raise like for a small to mid amount half the time, then yeah, you're probably not leaving too much value on the table there. So yeah, you can kind of see how that plays out. And if we just go to the next one, let me just find the example for yeah, it's actually kind of funny. Like when preparing, I think I had like more hands saved in Gito Wizard, like from just this example, like just preparing this period than I had beforehand. But it goes through, yeah, sometimes you'll work harder for other people than you will for yourself in a way. But yeah, on like the ace nine eight rainbow board, we can kind of see that yeah, it's a maybe if you look at like the big blind's calling range, well, yeah, they're going to have like a lot of these sort of hands that kind of connect with the 9-8, whether it's with a gut shot like Queen 10 or Jack 10, or having a pair like with the King 9, Queen 9. But you can sort of see how that 9-8 does connect somewhat better with the big blind's range. So if we just go to this point, uh, yeah, obviously they're not meant to be betting at any time, but you can sort of see on this board, it's only 64% equity for middle position and phase six for big blind, so it's not as much of a equity advantage compared to the other ace high boards that we saw. It kind of makes sense that the lower card boards are going to be generally the best ones, relatively speaking, for the big blind. You're not saying they'll have the full 50% equity on those boards when we get to them, but at least it's going to be a lot closer to 50% in that respect. Uh, I mean, I'll talk about more about that a bit later on. But yeah, if we kind of look at this instance here, like those having those two cards where I have basically when the big blind's going to have a lot of pairs in their donking range rather than a lot of pair. Well, it kind of means that, yeah, in this instance, we are going to be doing a lot of calling, like actually, and yeah, folding like 20%. I kind of, that's to be sort of a common heuristic with all these ace high boards. Well, at least the four that we've seen, they were kind of folding like the bottom 20% of hands or so. So yeah, that's going to be, these hands like, just the overcards don't really have that much potential to improve. Like you only have a backdoor straight draw. Okay, if you have the um yeah, so I'm looking at this, yeah, if you have the backdoor flush draw to go with the backdoor straight draw, then yeah, with the double backdoors you can kind of continue a small portion of time in the solver land. To be fair, against a live opponent, if you just fold there, I don't think you're really leaving much on the table in all fairness. Yeah, looking at sort of the EV, yeah, it's sort of saying that yeah, that you can just like fold it, you are losing money if you call or raise there. So yeah, probably it should just be a pure fold in reality. unless I'm massively misunderstanding the things shown here, but that's my understanding of it at least. And you can see again, like these sort of under pairs, they are going to fold, like lines will fold for some portion of time just because you just only have really two outs to kind of improve your hand. Whereas with a hand like, let's say, yeah, we say a hand like, let's say, Queen 10 suited. I mean, okay, it's true you have a direct gut shot, but also you have like a Queen or a 10 that you could hit to sort of potentially have the best hand if they don't have like the ace work. So that's kind of like the logic there. Like you want to have either a pair or like a hand that has some room to improve. And again, yeah, you're going to be calling a lot of these kind of weaker aces, and again, don't really want to bloat the pot too much. You got the 9x also doing a lot of calling here as well with the suited nines, because often you're going to have you're going to have the backdoor draw to go with it as well. So it's a case where you wouldn't really want to raise then sort of get free bet because you're going to be folding out quite a bit of equity in those sort of cases. So that's kind of why these hands do tend to work better as just a call here. And some of the 8x like 10-8. Well, I mean 9-8 is kind of two pair, but yeah, you will see some of these hands with like let's say some sort of backdoor to go with the pair will tend to be the ones that will do more of the racing, whereas if you don't sort of have that backdoor straight, let's say, to go with the backdoor flush, then yeah, you're probably just going to be calling more like hand like King 8 suited, for example. Um, and yeah, like Ace 10 suited, yeah, that's kind of like the more the value part of the racing range kind of starts from this point in that respect. So yeah, that's kind of the breakdown there, sort of showing how the closer it is to lower cards, the more likely we're going to be doing more calling. And the closer it is to high cards, like the more high cards there are, the more raising we're going to be doing, and that's also kind of the less calling we'll also tend to be doing in that respect. So seeing the final example of A side is going to keep an eye on the time as well, because yeah, this could end up being a little bit of a long video, but yeah, with like ace three deuce, you can kind of see the difference here that, when it's these two low cards, you actually are going to be doing a little bit of donking on from the big blinder. I mean, to be fair, if you're looking at it from the big blind's point of view, you probably could just check range here and like you're not really leaving much value on the table by doing that. But yeah, it is true. Like in theory, you could incorporate a little bit of a donking range with some of these gut shots, some of these weaker pairs. Kind of interesting to see that your ace X is actually going to be checking like the significant majority of the time. That yeah, you could donk like some of these like better ones a small portion, but again, it also complicates the strategy quite a bit for you if you are trying to incorporate donks into specific spots. Whereas just check everything kind of allows you to have sort of a simple strategy where you're not really leaving much behind. But you can sort of see the difference here that now, like previously on the other boards, we were doing a lot of raising. We can kind of see when there are two low cards on the board that we're basically never raising in this spot. That we're still going to be calling a very wide range just because then donks can just be a very wide range of hands as we kind of saw. Like we're beating the gut shots, we're beating the flush draws and this sort of thing. So it means that yeah, we're just kind of like folding out the hands, that just don't really have that much potential to improve. Yeah, kind of interesting to see that if you do have like the backdoor club draw, that the solver does actually consider that good enough to continue, unless you have a hand like say 8-7 suit or 9-7 suit, which can kind of have, let's say, reverse implied odds against another soft suit hand in that respect. Kind of interesting to see that yeah, 7-6 suit is kind of calling a lot, and these ones with the seven are not so much, which is probably connected to some sort of blockers that are going like way over my head. I mean, 6-5 is kind of a more obvious one because you do have the gut shots in that case to kind of continue with. But that's basically the idea. Like if you have like low cards, you're going to be calling a very wide portion of your range. You can see that the weakest calls, yeah, kind of coming from these like Broadway type of hands. And again, it's better if you sort of have the backdoor sort of flush draw. If you don't, you will be mixing in some folds. But again, not really a big problem if you just like call with range. You're not really losing out too much in a way. But yeah, if you say like you just fold the hands that don't have a backdoor and you call the ones that do have like the backdoor flush draw, yeah, maybe you lose like a tiny bit of like value by like doing this very simple strategy, but it's probably going to be a lot better for most people than say trying to have a much more complex strategy of frequencies and potentially making bigger mistakes as a result. But anyway, that's kind of the insights on the ace high boards, and if you are enjoying this training so far, yeah, do make sure to leave a like and to subscribe. I will admit there are some cases where, yeah, I will maybe take a little bit longer to explain it because a lot of these times, like here I am, you're kind of in the process of trying to figure it out in real time in a way where I can sort of, try to sort of explain and like force myself to put it into words so that, just to show that I actually kind of understand it for myself. But yeah, in this one here, we can start to get to kind of the second of five parts with the high card boards. That's the boards with high cards, which doesn't have an ace, so not an ace sideboard. And in general, on high card boards, we're going to have 63% equity on average as the middle position player. So maybe not quite as high as ace high with 66%, but still obviously, very high in that respect. But you can see again, like big blind is never really meant to donk, but if they do, again, we're kind of getting a little bit out of line, like maybe not as much as with the ace high boards, just because our equity is, not quite as massively high, but it's still pretty good here with 65% equity for middle position on the king queen deuce two-tone flop. And so you can kind of see, yeah, that again it's a similar pattern that we're not really folding that much, like only folding the bottom 20% of hands. So, the hands like the Jack eight suited and some of these like weaker ace highs that don't have the backdoor draw, then these ones are kind of folding and it sort of makes sense that ace 10 is kind of the threshold. We're not really going to be folding much because yeah, we do have the direct gut shot in that case with ace 10 and ace jack. So it kind of makes sense like that basically all the Broadway hands are continuing. Yeah, I mean in hands like with a nine suited, obviously it makes sense that 10 9 suited and jack 9 suited do have that gut shot to continue. So here a very simple heuristic is to say, yeah, we're basically going to be continuing with, the broadways and the gut shots and the sort of ace high, backdoor flush draws is kind of a pretty easy way to keep track of it. And you can kind of see, yeah, the pocket pairs are kind of mixing between all of the different options in that respect. I mean, with the nines and tens, it makes sense that those are going to continue more because they do have that backdoor flush draw, even if the backdoor straight draw, I should say. Uh, I guess it's true. Like you say, you have like nines and board comes like 10 jack. You do still lose to an ace, so I guess that's not ideal. But yeah, if you do have like that, if you do have like the sort of the spade in hand, it also does count as kind of a backdoor flush draw as well. Well, it's kind of interesting to see that the solver doesn't really care too much about that in this particular situation. But yeah, like in terms of the raising range, you can kind of see that it's sort of mixing with some hands, but yeah, the hands like, aces, kings, queens are basically just almost exclusively raising, like ace, king, the hands with a king in them, yeah, almost exclusively raising, except for, some of the absolute weakest top pairs like king eight, king seven, king six, and yeah, I mean, of the other hands, yeah, like if you have, like, say, pair with a backdoor sort of gut shot, then yeah, it kind of makes sense you sort of go for those. And yeah, I mean, looking at the stats here, you can see it's kind of fairly consistent in terms of percentages, not varying too much based on the suits, which is kind of an interesting point. But yeah, it is one where you're definitely going to be raising quite a bit more than you're going to be calling. So yeah, you could decide like just to raise like almost your full range. You're not really going to be losing that much value, but yeah, you could choose to have some checks, yeah, with some of these hands, like some of these gut shots, like the sort of the pair plus backdoor gut shot hands tend to be the ones that seem to be sort of favoring just the call as such. And also ace deuce, yeah, another one of those hands where you don't want to bloat the pot too much. So again, the call kind of makes sense there. Whereas, yeah, with some of these like lower aces, when you do have the direct flush draw, it kind of, yeah, makes sense to sort of, raise it because you're able to get better hands to fold. But you also still have good like drawing odds against the hands who will call that are currently a little bit ahead of you. But even then, like with the A's, like you still have like pretty close to 50% equity against their calling range. So that kind of works out as having like the nut flush draw as a logical raise. Whereas, yeah, I guess, yeah, if you have like a lower flush draw, like say, yeah, like the 9-8 suited, yeah, during it be kind of calling a little bit more with the flush draws that are not nutted in that sense because of the risk of inverse implied odds if the pot gets way too big. But yeah, I can't really talk more about this hand than maybe is strictly necessary, but if I kind of break it down this way, it probably allows us to also go through some of the higher card examples a little bit more concisely, because it means I can just kind of point out, what the similarities are very briefly and sort of point out the main differences. Again, you can kind of see on this King 10-4 rainbow that it's a lot less connected board. Well, yeah, so like the open enders of like Queen Jack suited, or Queen Jack, and some gut shots like Ace Queen and Ace Jack. There are some hands like that in the range, of course, but yeah, you don't have like a flush draw in that sense. Which does mean that yeah, when you look at these sort of ace highs are kind of like, let's say, the very best hands that we're going to be kind of folding, obviously, along with some of the weaker pocket pairs that just, don't have much potential to improve. And, there's like a backdoor flush draw to work with the pocket pairs here either. So it really is just kind of a two outer sort of hand. Or we could say like a pure bluff catcher in a sense. But yeah, basically, with the ace eight, you can kind of see this bit of a pattern that, yeah, sort of if you have actually, if you don't have the backdoor flush draw, then yeah, you're just going to be folding quite a bit more. I mean, it still kind of mixes in a way because yeah, with ace eight suited, for example, yeah, if you raise like an ace eight of hearts, they free bet like a very easy fold, not too concerned about it. But yeah, at the same time, like you wouldn't want to like fold out if you had like a bit more equity. Where say if we take like ace ten suited, yeah, that's not a hand you're going to see raising all that much because if you get free bet and have to fold it is a bit of a shame in a way when you sort of have like the double backdoor equity to go with the second pair. So that's kind of why you'll see those hands sort of checking a little bit more when you've got that sort of value. But even so, you're kind of seeing a general pattern of just a lot of raising and again just using these different sort of sizes. Yeah, kind of interesting as well actually to see that now like the 10.4 size like even going like close to the full pot is actually being used or going even a bit above what the current pot is. It's interesting to see that even that one is kind of being used in some frequency. Again, maybe not enough to necessarily for it to be worth like overcomplicating the strategy too much, but kind of seeing that be used with a lot of the thick value like ace king and fours and ace at some frequency. But again, if you kind of decide to sort of use like a sizing, say around like 5.35 to 7.55 with nearly the whole range, and yeah, you're not really leaving too much value. Like at worst, it would be a mixing mistake, let's say, to do that with like the significant majority of the range. Anyway, we do have a lot more examples to get through, so let's continue on with some of the next ones. Again, try to be a little bit more concise with some of these other high card boards. Like if we take Queen 10 6. Yeah, you can kind of see it's a pretty similar pattern here to what we saw before. One bit of a difference, I guess, is yeah, we're seeing a little bit more of even some bigger raise sizes, like going yes for a big overbet raise of like 14.1 as such. But again, it's a pretty low frequency play. And you kind of seeing yeah the same sort of patterns on this Queen 10 6 rainbow that again like so the weaker ace highs are just generally kind of folding in a way. The sort of ace nine. So yeah, it's kind of like the threshold of like maybe the weakest hand, let's say about a direct gut shot or, backdoor flush draw, or something about a direct gut shot that is sort of continuing in that respect. Because, yeah, with ace nine, you do have kind of like that double backdoor where, any eight, seven, jack, or king is going to give you a gut shot. So it means like almost half the deck basically is going to kind of improve your hand a little bit in some way. So it sort of makes sense there why that hand would call in that respect with like the double backdoor gut shot. And yeah, again, you're sort of seeing like this tendency that yeah, the lower pairs, like probably in a live saying, like honestly, you could almost probably purely fold the low pockets, and you probably wouldn't be leaving that much on the table, even though it's saying that yeah, it's kind of slightly negative EV to fold. Again, I think you're not leaving that much behind in fairness by doing so. Um, but yeah, it's it obviously depends on the opponent as well. And yeah, because obviously the calling range again is kind of coming from these sort of pairs, like these sort of middle pairs that are, or like, bottom pair with a really good kicker, like the ace 10, ace 6. We can see it's a lot of the ace X hands that really like to sort of check more in this spot. I mean, Jack 8 is kind of a gut shot, so it does make sense to kind of check that back, especially when you've got the backdoor flush shot to go with it. It's just a little bit too much equity to turn into a bluff raise in that respect. But yeah, you can sort of see like a lot of patterns kind of forming that by sort of repeating the examples over and over, it sort of allows you to kind of see the subtle differences, but yeah, kind of get to the point where it's like, okay, this is just an obvious pattern for me. And again, we sort of look at this Queen 5 Deuce Rainbow board when facing a big blind donk, which again, they're not supposed to do, but let's say if they do, then yeah, you can see at this point again, we're doing a little bit more calling than before when it's low cards. Not by an insane amount, but definitely you're seeing that a lot of the calls are kind of coming from the under pairs, where again, these hands are kind of good at catching bluffs, but you also only have two outs really to improve your hand. I suppose with the fours and the threes, you have kind of like the backdoor gut shot. Likewise for the sixes, that kind of also I think explains why they're sort of like kind of just flatting a lot more and not really raising quite as much. But yeah, you're sort of seeing the pattern that that's where a lot of the calling range is coming from. Also, some of that ace high, like ace jack and ace king, that just makes a kind of good bluff catcher and also gives you the double backdoor. Again, you kind of would want to, let's say, raise with that backdoor, double backdoor equity, then get free bet off your equity from there. At least in like a human point of view, like obviously you can see the solver is raising that some part of the time as well. But yeah, basically that's explain a little bit of why the solver is doing what it does, at least from my limited point of view. Um, and yeah, like also, yeah, kind of like the ace five, like these wheel sort of aces. Obviously, yeah, quite nice. You sort of have like in my case, like the nut, the nut sort of backdoor flush draw. You also have the gut shot ace four, ace three. That sort of makes sense if you have the pair, you're kind of checking, you're kind of calling a little bit more. And if you have just the sort of gut shot, then you're kind of turning out more to a bluff. And that's where the kind of bluff raises are coming from here. Yeah, and in terms of the overcard, yeah, sort of seeing hands like King 10 suited, King Jack, like sort of these hands that have the sort of the backdoor straight draw, and like some overcard, and sort of also very good candidates to kind of donk raise at this point. They really do at a very high frequency. So that breaks down that spot, just sort of seeing what hands tend to favor calling, ones with some decent showdown value, and what ones tend to prefer raising in that respect, just observing the patterns. And for this final flop of Jack 9-7 Rainbow, obviously it's one where, there are kind of all kinds of gut shots of pairs. And again, if you sort of look at the big blinds kind of defending range, you're seeing, a lot of those 8x that they continue with have that gut shot. Obviously, a lot of like the 10x as well. I mean, yeah, I've also have a lot of suited cards, like maybe a lot of backdoor draws. But yeah, looking at kind of the offsuit range, you can see that's a lot of pairs up. I mean, even King Queen offsuit is like it's sort of a backdoor straight draw with also two. Actually, no, it's just a gut shot actually with with two overcards as well, so you get like quite a bit of equity even with some of the higher parts of their range as well on this sort of flop. So yeah, basically, I still they should check it, but if they do bet, they're going to kind of seeing this sort of pattern that when the board gets, let's say, a little bit more connected without like really high cards like the Broadways, then yeah, you're going to be generally doing a lot more calling in that spot. Remember I learned like kind of a nice heuristic from one of my coaches a while back. That if there's sort of two cards, nine or higher, on a flop, there you're going to see like a lot more, let's say, checking from the sort of player in position after, say, the big blind checks back, just because it will kind of hit with the big blinds range a little bit more like when I have these sort of like, cards like the 8, 9, 10, Jack, this sort of thing. I'm probably misremembering the principle a little bit, but that's kind of my partial explanation for why we're sort of calling. So just there are a lot of pairs and gut shots in the big blinds range here. And so yeah, the checks are kind of coming again from these sort of like middle pair type hands or your hands with some decent showdown value, like a lot of the ace-X, but then yeah, we're kind of folding like the weaker ace-X where you only have like one overcard, then it makes sense of those they're going to be folding for the most part. Again, the lower pockets like the under pairs, except for the sixes, I guess, because you kind of have the potential like backdoor straight with like the 8 and 5 coming, but with some of the other ones, yeah, kind of just like folding them more often than anything else in this situation. Again, I sort of have a feeling that because it's a very rare spot, because they never really meant to bet, this is probably why some of the like result showing are kind of a little bit wonky in terms of the ratio between the percentages and the like between the EV and like how often it does each action. But yeah, kind of seeing a lot of calls here from like the middle pair, even on quite a few of the Jack X as well, actually doing a lot of just calling, and then yeah, the raises are kind of not as often, but kind of coming from these more polar hands, like a fair bit of this, 8x or is kind of doing quite a bit of the raising. Also, yeah, kind of these sort of suited Broadway hands. We've got, like let's say a gut shot here, or you've got a pair plus gut shot. Yeah, those kind of hands, yeah, just sort of really enjoying going for the raise. And yeah, obviously if you have like a sets or an overpair, it kind of makes sense that those will be going for it more. That sort of the usual principle I kind of notice when looking at solvers is kind of the closer your overpair is to the highest card, the more you're generally going to be kind of playing it aggressively, and the more it's like say close to aces, the more into solver line you're going to be kind of checking that rather than racing. But yeah, that's kind of like just a little bit of a breakdown of the range. And yeah, obviously we're going to be continuing with any seven, but yeah, with the sevens we are just going to be calling down, and yeah, it's more the gut shots and really strong hands are going to kind of be the bluffs in this spot. Anyway, that's breaking down the yeah for the high card boards. Now we can look a little bit at the paired boards. Again, it's going to keep an eye on the time because I realize that this one's going to be a bit of a long one. But yeah, basically, if we look at sort of the big blind, yeah, again on the queen, queen seven two tone, they're not really meant to do any sort of leading out here because just ratio wise, they just have way less queen X or pocket sevens, than the low jack has in that respect. Just because their range is so much wider. But yeah, basically looking at this chart, yeah, you can kind of see already a little bit of a difference. So I realized one thing I kind of didn't really talk about as much was sort of like just the equities on some of those high card boards. But like of the flops we saw, like the lowest one was 60% equity for middle position versus 65% equity, like in the highest case. And you can sort of see the difference how that 5% of equity that we were doing a lot more raising and calling, we had 65%, but we were doing more calling than raising when we had 60%. Now, if you take the paired board, just overall what the middle position equity is going to be against the big blind, it's going to be an average of about 62% in that respect. And it's going to be like fairly consistent actually with a couple of exceptions that we'll kind of get to. But basically, yeah, in this spot you can kind of see that again on the paired board here we are doing a fair bit more calling in comparison. And yeah, like basically, you can sort of see the under pairs doing a lot of calling, a lot of the ace high also doing a fair bit of calling. Also some raising as well. Like I'm sort of seeing it, yeah, if you have the direct flush draw, you're kind of doing a bit more raising just because yeah, on the paired board your flush draw has a little bit less value when the opponent could potentially get a full house with some runouts. That's why it's more when you kind of go for it as a semi bluff compared to say if the board wasn't paired as such. But yeah, that's kind of and yeah, obviously the queens just going for it for value in general. That again kind of makes sense that like the weakest queens are going to be the ones who will do a little more checking. But again, if you just decide to raise all of your queens, even if in theory it's a little imbalanced, you should be protecting your range by having some queens in your calling range. Again, if you're playing against like not so experienced opponents, it's probably not going to matter all that much. You just kind of go for the value if they're like just overcalling anyway. We're doing like the actual solver output. If we can look at yeah some of the other hands, like what are going to be more the raising candidates. I'll still kind of know, so we're just going to be doing a lot of relatively small raising on a paired board just because of how kind of polar the ranges are. It's like, okay, either you have like trips or a full house, you have something just, considerably weaker. It's just very, one way or the other on such a board. But yeah, you can kind of see, like, if you look at the bluffs, they're kind of coming from, yeah, I mean, sort of the 7x are kind of doing a lot of just calling, like, not so much racing. And yeah, the raise are definitely coming from a lot of these sort of flush draws, kind of a pattern we can see. It's like the flush draws really come where a lot of the bluffs are coming from, and you also kind of hands that kind of wrap around a little bit. Like if you're wrapping around the queen specifically, these hands like king jack and king ten. That's sort of why these hands are going to be doing a bit more kind of raising. You're not going to see ace high doing as much raising just because it does have some decent showdown value against the various bluffs that the big blind might be donking. And yeah, like with Jack 10, you can kind of see, like, because they're both undercards, like, without having the overcard, it just is not going to be as good of a bluffing candidate. And yeah, you will see some of these hands, like, the Jack 9, if it doesn't have the back door, that is going to be doing a lot more folding without the back door. You kind of want, like, to have both, let's say, a backdoor flush and a backdoor straight at least in order to kind of continue, unless you have an overcard, is kind of the principle here. Okay, we talked a bit about this example, but the nice thing about going deep in the first one is it means that we can be a little bit more concise with some of the other ones in turn, when we kind of know what the general principles are. With this next example of Jack 9-9, yeah, you can kind of see that, yeah, it's sort of interesting to see like the solver does throw in like a few donks, a small percentage, but again, for simplicity's sake, you're probably better off just checking range rather than trying to remember which ones you sort of lead out 5% or 10% of the time or something. But anyway, looking at this, you can kind of see that on the boards where the solver does give big blind a very small donking range, those are kind of the boards where we'll tend to check a lot. And again, we can kind of see this principle that just because the big blinds bottom of, let's say, their range is going to be like these offsuit 8x, 9x, 10x, Jack X, it kind of makes sense then that, well, certainly like these parts, a larger portion with the 8s and 9s and 10s. But you can kind of see that pattern that would just follow like a much more passive strategy when they do donk on these boards with like the 8, 9, 10 Jack sort of cards in it as such. So yeah, at this point, even though it's saying, you will be raising a small percent, like with mostly ace nine suited and a few kind of bluffs, like with various backdoors to kind of balance that in a way. I think that for all intents and purposes, you could just basically just call with range and fold out the like heads are obviously don't have much potential, like the 7-6. Because with 7-6, like say if you hit the 8 and the 5, like or the 8 and the 10, then yeah, you just kind of have really bad reverse implied odds where you're still going to be losing the any queen in that spot. So that's kind of why these hands will tend to fold if you have like the really, let's say, reverse implied odds gut shots. And you can also see, yeah, if you don't have the flush draw, and certainly for sure if you don't have the backdoor flush draw, that yeah, these kind of hands like the king eye and ace high, yeah, just kind of folded quite a lot. That you kind of want to have either like the backdoor, like the direct flush draw, or the backdoor flush draw, or some sort of overcard, or in the case of the 10, at least you sort of have the backdoor gut shot to go with the backdoor draw. So that's kind of why you're continuing more with those sort of hands. Whereas yeah, if you don't have the backdoor sort of the backdoor flush to go with the backdoor straight, that's why you'll see those hands kind of folding. Like say the if it's an ace without a spade, and yeah, it's basically just folding in this spot as a general principle. So yeah, so that's kind of a pretty easy way to do it. Where when you're just been calling with nearly your whole range, it's kind of easier to remember the folding range than the calling range in a sense. Or you just kind of remember just sort of what the threshold is. Then when you know the threshold, you kind of see, well, if it's better than the threshold, we continue, and if it's worse, we just fold in a sense. Anyhow, moving on to some of the other examples. Let me just go to this 775. And yeah, the 775 is kind of an interesting one because you only have 50% and 7% equity on this board. Which means that, yeah, with 775, like obviously a lot of the hands are kind of continuing if that are suited, are going to have some connectivity with this run out. And obviously, if you look at the low tracks range, yeah, you're not really going to have that many nuts. Like, yeah, you've got, okay, only one combo with sevens. You've got, what is it, like four? Is it four? No, like three combos of the pocket fives, as it were. So again, like you don't have that many combinations of nuts in this spot. Like your value really is kind of coming from your overpairs. You can kind of see that's not such a big percentage of the range. Like there's only so much 7x you can have, like especially when you keep in mind that these are suited. Like that's only two combinations of each of these for like eight combinations of these, 7, 8x hands. Well, actually 10 if you include 7, 6 suited, but yeah. That kind of explains why when the big blind just has kind of a lot more of these hands that interact with the 7 and 5 with the low cards. That's why you're just going to be just checking like virtually all the range. And yeah, the folds is kind of coming from these overcards just don't have any real connectivity with the 7, 7, 5. But yeah, it is kind of interesting just how low our sort of folding percentage is on this kind of run out. And that's because, yeah, even with the overcards, you are going to have, some decent equity. Like, say, if you've got the 10, 9 suited, for example, like, still have the backdoor straight with the 8 or 6 to go with, like, all the other stuff. And, in 3 of the 4 cases, you also have the backdoor flush draw to go with it. So I think it's just the fact that a very large percentage of your hands are suited is kind of the reason why you're really continuing. But like basically, like an easy way to remember is all the suited hands are basically continuing. Okay, if you don't have the backdoor flush draw, then yeah, some of these hands, like the weaker than king, queen are kind of folding. But like all the a6 is obviously continuing because yeah, you've still got decent equity against a very, very wide docking range, which is going to have a lot of bluffs if they're balancing it correctly. But anyway, continuing on with the next paired board that we have here. I don't think with paired boards, I notice a lot of people don't really size correctly on them, but that's I guess a topic for another time. So on this one here, 662, it's kind of interesting. We do have that 62% equity. And I think the reason for that is that yeah, even though they continue with virtually all the suited hands, like there's just so many offsuit hands they have, yeah, they're just folding like virtually all the offsuit six and twos except for, king six, ace six are just going to be like folding there. So that kind of explains, yeah, why in this spot when they do donk, which, yeah, to be fair, they actually will, when you have like these such low cards, like, all of them below, like below broadways as such. But yeah, it makes sense you'll see like a little bit more donking, yeah, especially from the 2x that seems to really favor the donks in this spot. Because it's kind of, yeah, a spot where I guess you're happy to fold out some overcards that might still have some decent equity against you in that spot. Where if you call, they call with wide range, you're not in that bad of a shape either with the kind of weak pair in a sense. So we're looking at the defense, you can see it's like very similar to the previous example. They were only really folding like this of, the let's say worst offsuit hands we have, which are like the weakest offsuit broadways. That if we have a suit hand, it means we likely have a backdoor flush, and therefore that's going to be enough for us to continue. Then yeah, even like the weaker hands like Jack 8 suited. Okay, there you only have two go over cards, but yeah, as long as you have the backdoor flush to go with it, it is going to be a continue on this rainbow board. And again, like no raising because yeah, it just doesn't really make sense when you just have a very small amount of 6x, like only ace six, eight suited, king six suited, only like ace deuce or pocket twos, and yeah, you don't really have the nut advantage as it were, because like your best hands are mostly going to be over pairs. So that's kind of again makes sense when you don't have that nut advantage, you will tend to do a lot more calling. Anyway, moving on to I think there was one more paired board to go with this. Yeah, the king free one is kind of an interesting one where we do have the 63% equity, but kind of again we can see this general heuristic that we're just not really doing a whole lot of raising on paired boards, so it's almost always calling against the donk. And yeah, if you want to, yeah, you could like raise the ace free suited, which yeah, like the one set of kind of frees you have in your range, like with the trips. And then yeah, balancing out like with a bit of other value like aces and kings and some other hands like that are kind of like wrapping around a little bit. But again, the frequencies are so small with there is like only 7.6%. That honestly you probably could just call like with all your continuing range, it's not really gonna be too big of a problem. Like you're not really gonna lose too much value in that respect. And it makes your strategy a lot simpler. And again, similar pattern, like you sort of have some sort of backdoor kind of draw, like to go with it. Say if you have like a double backdoor, like to wrap around with a king, then yeah, that's usually going to be enough equity for you to continue there. We see all the ace high is continuing as well. And yeah, kind of like the threshold is sort of like that queen 10. But if you have like say queen 10 or jack 10, like for the backdoor straight, but you don't sort of have like the spade to go with it, then yeah, it's just going to be folding in that case without that additional backdoor equity. So yeah, we're kind of seeing some useful principles of dealing with donks, and yeah, you often do want the like a double backdoor equity to kind of continue in a lot of these spots, or let's say one backdoor at kind of an overcard to work with in order to sort of be able to continue in a sense. Or in this case, yeah, like with a pair board, so even just like a pure ace high is going to be typically good enough to continue in a lot of these instances. With like the exception of the Jack 9 one, if I remember correctly. But with that, I think we can kind of have a quick look at the monotone flops, which yeah, they don't occur as often, but overall the middle position player does have that 60% equity against the big blind, so it's just going to be quite a nice spot, like quite a nice sort of flop for us. Like not the best, but not the worst either. I mean, I guess the reason that the equity is not quite as good for the middle position player as let's say the ace high or the high card ones or the paired ones is it is true that the big blind is continuing with a lot of suited hands, so it means they're going to have some chunk of flushes in their defending range for that reason. But at the same time, still obviously quite a good spot. Because I mean, we also have a decent chunk of suited hands in our range relatively. But anyway, looking at this, yeah, when the big blind donks, which they're never really meant to do, like especially when you've got the ace queen nine. I mean, with those sort of high cards, you have 63% equity on this flop. But still, we're kind of seeing this pattern that yeah, you're not really going to be raising so much here. And I guess the logic is that when you raise, you're kind of getting their bluffs to fold when you might want to keep them in. But at the same time, like if they sort of call, then yeah, you're also maybe not so sure where you're really at in a certain sense. So it's a case where you're kind of just like calling with like nearly all the range, and that yeah, basically the way it's sort of balancing the race tray is kind of like having the, sort of like this bottom set and second set, kind of raising. Because yeah, even if you have a flush, like you still have like decent equity, let's say, to to turn or river a full house in that respect. I think about 30% if I remember correctly. But yeah, basically you also see a lot of these sort of other hands too, like even without the let's say about like the flushes that were. But yeah, you're kind of still going to be continuing if you have a pair or some sort of like gut shot. It'll be good enough to generally continue in this situation. And yeah, if you don't, then it's all will be tend to be more of a fold if you don't have the gut shot there. So that's why we're seeing like a little bit more folding, I guess, in this compared to some of the other flops we saw, like all of the ace. Well, I mean, ace high is going to be a pair, but yeah, basically the threshold is kind of like these sort of like king ten, king jack that do have the gut shot, or if you do have a pair, you will generally be continuing. But yeah, you can see that the lower pairs are kind of mixing where yeah, if you have the spade in hand here, like if you have that sort of flush draw, then you're kind of going to be continuing there just because you do block flushes, but if not, you're going to be just folding as a general principle. So there, yeah, we can see kind of a few useful heuristics where essentially it's actually not as different to like the other types of flops as one might think, but yeah, it's still good to kind of see like those patterns being reinforced. And yeah, looking at kind of the king jack 6-1, again, they're not really meant to be donking, but if they do, yeah, we're still mostly calling. We kind of see some more races kind of being mixed on the non-ace side, monotone flops. And also don't worry to kind of see if you do look at these sort of hands, like say the ace queen and, some of these ones here that, if you do have like the nut flush, yeah, you are meant to raise it a decent percentage. But if you don't have the nut flush, then yeah, in those spots you're going to be more calling like with these hands with have like at least a gut shot in it. And yeah, so the weaker ace X that doesn't have that flush yeah, is obviously going to be more folding in that spot. So that's kind of the threshold here. You kind of need to have ace high with a gut shot in this case. Or if we look at a hand like queen 10, yeah, I mean queen 10, yeah, you do have the open ender in that instance. Uh, if you take queen 9, you do have a gut shot. But you can kind of see that if you don't have like the spades for the flush, then yeah, that hand is generally going to be folding like at least as often, if not a bit more than than all the other options combined. So it's kind of really the threshold. Like you kind of need at least basically need like at least a gut shot to continue in this spot. In fact, you could say you even need probably at least an open ender or let's say an ace high gut shot to be able to continue in this spot. And yeah, again, same principle with the under pairs that you really want to have the spade in hand here. The same one in the same as what's on the monotone flop in order to really be able to continue. Otherwise, it is going to be a fold. Uh, and yeah, if you have like a pair as well, like say you have 7-6 suit, yeah, you see that that hand is still continuing because yeah, you're still beating the bluffs, like you're still ahead of the many one spade hands they're going to be let's say donking with in a sense. So yeah, that's kind of how it works. Just a lot of checking and yeah, the raise is kind of coming more from like the really strong hands, like the nut flushes and the sets, and just being balanced with kind of a whole mix of different bluffs and semi bluffs. But again, like with the raises, yeah, you can probably just sort of like take sort of the hands and kind of have like some middle sort of strength and kind of work those into sort of balance the range that way. But kind of see there aren't actually that many bluffs being found, like as well. These sort of just very low equity bluffs that are kind of coming in. But again, I think it's not the biggest problem if you're, let's say, not finding some of these sort of random, like 9-8 suited sort of raises where they mostly fold and occasionally, raises a bluff, as it were. But anyhow, yeah, monotone boards, yeah, not the easiest ones to play. But moving on to another one this time with some lower cards like 10-7 deuce. Again, they shouldn't really be docking at all, but if they do, yeah, we kind of see that. Again, common pattern these monotone flops that when they dock, we're just going to be doing a whole lot of calling. Because what I probably should emphasize a bit more is that, yeah, when we do raise, we're almost always going to be raising for a small amount on these monotone boards just because, on a monotone board, it's going to be like either way ahead or way behind in a lot of cases. So it just sort of makes sense in that respect. And again, so looking at the thresholds on the 10-7 deuce, you're kind of seeing it even, a hand as good as ace king is actually going to be mixing in. some folding, yeah, when you don't have when you don't have like the nut flush in that sense. So I think we can see when it's lower cards, that just favors it just makes the big blind situation a lot less bad than some of the other ones. That here we only have 58% equity, and I'm kind of seeing a little bit of a pattern actually in this kind of thresholds, like not just with the monotone flops, but actually with kind of all of these sort of flops we're seeing here. That if sort of the middle position has kind of 60% equity or less, that usually means that yeah, you're going to be kind of doing a relatively more calling in a lot of cases. But if you have sort of like 60% or more, then yeah, you're more often going to be kind of like going for the raises perhaps a little bit more. I mean, it kind of depends actually. That heuristic actually kind of has a lot of exceptions now I think about it. But yeah, basically in this case, we kind of see now we are mostly calling, and yeah, the raise again kind of coming from sort of from like the nut flushes are kind of like raising a decent percentage, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. So yeah, basically a lot of the raises are just coming from the flushes. And in terms of yeah, where the balance is coming from is yeah, from some of these hands like sort of things like 8-7 to 9-7, like some of these kind of like weaker pairs are sort of, balancing like the range with just the flushes. But again, it's sort of the case where, if let's say you decide, okay, I need to have like at least let's say like at least, a pair or, some sort of some sort of spade in the hand to kind of continue. Like say if you sort of had that sort of heuristic sort of in your mind, then yeah, you could probably follow that and not really lose out too much in that sort of way. And it does make your strategy simply say, okay, I need to have either a spade in hand or I need to have a pair or better in order to continue in this spot. And again, yeah, similar pattern we're seeing with some of these pair lower pocket pairs as well. Um, yeah, actually, I'm kind of underestimating how long like how much effort it is to takes to get through all these different spots. But yeah, even though it's obviously quite challenging, like to get through like so many different flops, it does pay off to I think cover like the full range of situations and kind of push through the discomfort, I suppose. And yeah, it sort of makes sense looking at this one here, like when it's a monotone flop with a lot of low cards, like that's just going to give the blank blind just more equity. Like now the middle position only has 56% equity. So that's why I'm kind of seeing nearly as much calling as raising. And yeah, it's like quite mixed. We're kind of seeing a lot of these kind of top pairs just happy to really call a significant percentage of the time. Yeah, ace four suited also doing a lot of calling. These under pairs seven, six and fives again just doing a lot of flatting in this spot. The ace highs. Again, like with the ace highs, you really want to have a spade in hand in order to continue. If you don't have the spade, then it kind of mixes between folding and and calling and raising. That being said, if in a actual live scene you decide just to fold with with like when you don't have the spade in hand there, yeah, it's not 100% accurate according to the GTO, but again, you're probably not losing out too much by making a small mixing mistake. And again, it makes it a lot easier to execute if you say, okay, I either need to have a pair to continue or like a gut shot, or I need to have like a spade in hand if I don't have a pair in a certain sense. Um, but yeah, basically, if you look at where the raises are, that yeah, it's going to be a lot of these kind of overcard type hands, like the 10-9 suit, Jack 9 suit, Queen 9, which to be fair, do also have kind of the backdoor straight. But yeah, you're also seeing that your raise also coming from like a decent chunk of the overpairs as well. Okay, to be fair, they're kind of mixing between it. But yeah, that's sort of a way you can sort of look at it if you sort of realize that okay, like virtually all of the range is kind of mixing between between a call and a raise, like of the continuing range. Well, yeah, you can kind of like adapt that accordingly and say, okay, I can just sort of, go either way depending on, maybe how I feel like about the opponent and sort of and what sort of seems right in the time. But again, seeing yeah, a lot of like the ace high hands are going to be generally calling, like you have decent churn value, are generally calling a lot more. Unless you have the nut flush, in which case, yeah, you will be raising quite a bit more. But yeah, that kind of makes sense. So yeah, that's all the breakdown of the monotone flops and yeah, kind of seeing some interesting heuristics in terms of yeah, it makes sense that with the lower cards we're kind of raising a bit less, and with the higher cards, yeah, we actually also kind of raising a bit less. Like it's interesting how it seems to be more the cards in the middle that we tend to be doing having more of a raising range on a monotone flop, which is kind of an interesting concept in itself. Like not one that maybe would be immediately obvious, just like thinking from a human point of view. But yeah, looking at the final types of hands, this is the low card flops, and it sort of makes sense with these low card flops that the equity is going to be a lot closer. Because on low card flops, where there are all cards lower than 10, so no Broadway cards, basically the middle position place equity is only going to be 54%, because obviously the opposite versions of those hands, like nearly all of them, are basically folding pre-flop. Like say if we look at the range here, we obviously don't have any offsuit nines in our hands. So the only pairs that we really have that are not, let's say like over pairs or sets here, are going to be like the suited hands. And even then you only have you might have a lot of 9x suited, but you don't have that much 7x suited, and you don't really have much 5x suited, like just ace 5 suited and 6-5 suited. And yeah, you can kind of see looking at the against the donking strategy. And again, interesting to see that that the solver does incorporate a donks a small percentage of time with a combination of these kind of junky got shots and like overcard plus gut shots, and obviously some value hands like 9-7s, 5s. It's interesting, yeah, to see like that when I do have this. In this case, we are going to be doing a whole lot of calling. Again, we're kind of going to be folding out sort of like just the overcard type hands, and some of the weakest ace X that just doesn't have that backdoor flush draw is also just going to be folding as such. But if you do have like two overcards, with like an ace being one of them, or if you have, let's say, a backdoor draw to go with it, then yeah, you are generally going to be sort of continuing, as it were. And yeah, at this point, you can kind of see there aren't really that many hands that are kind of raising the majority of time. Like only really the sets with like the 9s, 7s, 5s that are really kind of raising more often than any other action in a sense. And also kind of seeing again that sizing of either a small raise or a mid raise of like close to the current pot of 7.55. So in terms of where the bluffs are coming from, you're kind of seeing, there's going to be a lot of the 8x is where a decent chunk of the bluffs are with like that gut shot. Yeah, that still has that overcard that has that room to kind of improve in a sense. Um, yeah, and also, some of the flush draws as well, you kind of see, like the nut flush draws, kind of a little bit more inclined to raise as well, unless you have like two overcards, then you're just going to be checking it a bit more, and as such, just because you have so much equity already, it's like you almost have too much equity to kind of call to just to raise in that spot. But yeah, that's basically how it kind of works. Like basically a lot of the gut shots and the kind of flush draws out. Let's say two overcards tend to be more of the raising candidates. I mean, that's safe. It's not 100% accurate, but it's fairly close. And again, like with some of these overcards, the continuing is coming from the ones that do have that kind of backdoor draw to go with them, like the king of diamonds or the jack of diamonds. If we look at the king jack example. So anyhow, moving on to another low card board, as we kind of see that tendency to just really call a lot more. With 8-5-3 Rainbow, you can see it's a little bit less connected than the 9-7-5 that we just saw. It's going to be obviously like various gut shots and like open enders with 7-6 or whatever. But yeah, if they do sort of decide to donk, which again they should do, we're kind of seeing that we are still mostly calling, but the rays are kind of coming from a lot of these sort of overcard cards, like the 9x suits seem to be doing a lot, like the 10x also doing a decent chunk, like if you don't have like an ace high or a king high, which all makes sense because when you raise, you're kind of trying to get with these sort of lower overcard hands, like you're trying to get king x or ace x to fold. So it sort of makes sense that if you have one of those hands, those cards in your hand, you're not going to be raising quite as much, perhaps. Well, with the exception of something like king jack suit and king queen suit is kind of doing a lot of raising with the backdoor draw. But yeah, if you look at the ace high, it's kind of like the ace high that does have like that backdoor straight is kind of again more where the raises are coming from. But still, it's kind of easy, I guess, to focus on the raise. So then you kind of realize that, most of the time you are just going to be calling in this spot. Okay, obviously it makes sense, the overpairs are raising in this case, because that's really where the fixed value is coming from, because, you're going to have so many, threes, eights, fives, and threes in a range, like it's only, three combos each for 9 combos total, so you need to kind of fill it out with the overpairs as well for your fixed value. Um, and obviously like the 8x is going to be like top pair as such. So again, you can start to see as pattern like the bluffs are really coming from the from the overcard type hands with us that are suited. Whereas if they aren't suited, yeah, you're generally going to be folding them as such. Kind of interesting that Queen Jack and Queen 10 are kind of continuing more there. But I think that's because along with the overcards, you do have the backdoor flush draw, the backdoor straight draw, I should say. Then if you hit, let's say, a 9 and a jack, then you get your straight, as it were. So like that, a little bit of extra equity is enough to just kind of call. But again, if you kind of decide just to fold like all the offsuit, offsuit like overcards that don't have an ace in them, and you raise like with the obvious value like 8 plus, and also also like the suited overcards with the backdoor draw. Again, you're not leaving too much on the table with a simplified strategy like that. Moving on to the next paired board. Let me just find it just here. The 8-4 deuce. Again, you can see they're not really meant to raise, but if they do, it's kind of a very similar strategy to what we just saw before, where, okay, I guess with the 4 deuce of EDO, seeing that more it's the hands like ace 3 and ace 5, so kind of more the gut shots are kind of going for it. Also, like the 6-5 suited, also kind of getting in there. And then, with like the 8x, like obviously, like the stronger ones kind of going for value. Whereas the weaker 8x, like 9-8 suit, 10-8 suit, do tend to be doing a little bit more checking in comparison. Obviously, it makes sense. A lot of the ace high with the 2 overcards is generally going to be calling as well. So really, it's a very similar pattern to what we saw in the previous hand, which really kind of makes sense in a way. And I wouldn't worry too much about like finding these low equity sort of these low percentage like bluffs with like the under pairs. Again, it's something that is probably not really necessary to kind of master, but it is I think if one wants to go really deep into the weeds. But it's obviously interesting as well to see like a very connected kind of flop like 6-5-4 where this is one of the very rare boards where just such connected low cards, just because the big blind has basically 49% equity, like almost 50% equity. You're going to see him actually leading out quite a lot, just because it is really one of the worst possible boards, like the worst humanly possible board, almost for the middle position. So that's kind of why we're also going to sort of not really have that much of a raising range. Like honestly, if you decided like just to kind of just call with 100% of range, like you're honestly probably not losing that much in EV by going for such a strategy. Because what the solver's doing is they're saying, okay, 8-7 suitors are nuts, we're going to raise that a lot for a small amount typically. But then we're going to bounce with kind of like this gamut of bluffs, like these sort of gut shots, like 9-7 suited. Obviously this is top pair, but hands like ace-3 suited. Some of these overcards, like these gut shots with the 8 a little bit. That's kind of the way it's doing. It's finding like a lot of small percentage bluffs with quite a few different hands to sort of balance out the many times in which you're kind of going for it with 8-7 suited. But again, that is also a lot more complicated to execute. So if you decide to sort of follow a strategy of, okay, I'm going to just call with like any pair or gut shot or better, and I'm going to continue like with overcards that do have the backdoor flush draw or the backdoor straight draw. If you go for some sort of approach like this, that would be the simplest way to approach it. And with that, we actually get down to our very last flop, actually, which is the 4-3 deuce, which it's kind of interesting actually to see that of the low card flops, we have like 54% average equity on the low card flops. That 4-3 deuce is actually probably the best one for middle position with 57% equity. And I think a big reason for that is that you just have so much ace X in your range, which does kind of give you the gut shot to go with to go with like the ace high. So I think that's probably the reason why it gives you more equity, because you have a lot more ace X than they do, but you have a lot more gut shots than they do. And you do see like there is going to be some, donking, like there's a pretty, like a lot of hands doing it at a very low frequency is what we kind of see here. In terms of the continuing range, you kind of see a similar pattern. We're just kind of folding out the overcards that don't have some sort of backdoor draw. We're continuing with the ones that do have a backdoor draw. And like all the ace highs obviously continuing because you've got the gut shot, all the pocket pairs continuing because, well, these are obviously sets, fives and open ender, and above that, you've got, a pretty nice hand, like pretty high in your range. So that's kind of how that works. Like see fairly similar patterns to what we saw in the previous ones. And with that, I know we went through like 24 different flops, but I'll admit, like right now, like my throat is getting like, a little voice getting a little hoarse, and my nose getting like a little bit sort of runny as well. So I'm also kind of proud of myself having persisted this far. I think as we can kind of see, the patterns of how our strategy differs depending on what type of flop it is, where we kind of can draw some There's some general conclusions, like if you've got an ace high or a high card one, that's just going to give you a lot more equity, like close to two-thirds equity of the pot, which means you're going to have like a lot more raising in those kind of spots, generally speaking. Whereas with the ones like sort of the paired monotone and low card, we have a bit less equity, like in the range of 62%, 60% for monotone to 54% for low card. It makes sense you're going to be kind of doing a lot more checking on those spots in general. That's kind of the idea, like, so the more high cards are on the board, the more you can kind of have more of a raising range, and the more low cards, the more you're going to kind of just be calling, having a bit less of a raising range. And again, if you go deep in the weeds, you're going to see there's some exceptions, but that's kind of just a good general principle to keep in mind. I can also see like the raising range was kind of coming from like when we were raising a decent chunk of hands like that. Often we're kind of mixing with a lot of our hands between your call and raise. But then when we were raising, like the ones with a higher percent would tend to be more the hands that were, yeah, either just some obvious fixed value, like some good top pairs or better. And then also some hands that were kind of like either a gut shot or, a flush draw, like a really strong flush draw. Or it's like some sort of double backdoor hand or backdoor with an overcard. Those are sort of where the sort of bluff raising candidates were sort of typically coming from. And if you guys sort of had a hand like second pair or bottom pair, then those hands were generally just kind of calling a lot more. So yeah, those kind of the principles. I hope that you found it valuable. I know that I certainly picked up some quite useful ideas for my own game by looking at this. And so yeah, I hope that you found this useful, and I will see you next training. Take care.